Now live with the August 14th meeting of the Node.js modules group. We have 8 people on the call right now. I think we're still expecting some more to show up. Have a decently full agenda, so we'll jump right into it, starting with number 28614 from Node.js Node, ESM support loading data URLs. I believe, but I could be wrong, that Brad is one of the leads on this. Is there anyone who would be able to help with notes? Anyone? Bueller?
I can review notes and flush them out. Might be hard on this topic, though. Other topics I can cover.
Could someone please volunteer to help with notes here?
I can help for a little bit, but I'm going to be driving in a minute, so someone else should also volunteer.
I can take a crack at it.
Great, thank you. Brad, do you want to start the discussion here?
So we talked about this last meeting with data URLs. There aren't any objections to it on the PR itself currently, so I don't know if we're wanting to wait on this or do what. We don't have quorum here, but at the same time, we don't have a moratorium. I am just trying to figure out if we can go ahead with this.
I think that we're good to move forward personally. Jordan has their hand up.
Yeah, we talked about it a bit last week and a bit on the PR. I guess I'm still, this still kind of feels like something that is going to be abused more than it's used, and that is being added, like the benefits of adding it for like the use cases that can only be achieved with this are minimal. They're not zero, but they seem minimal to me. And the justification seems to be, well, the web did it, so let's do the same thing. And there's a lot of decisions on the web I hope Node doesn't just adopt because the web did it. And this kind of seems to be one of them. This is like data URIs were originally meant for assets and not for modules, and they work in modules in the browser, but like that kind of seems to have fallen out of the way data URIs work. And you know, I guess I'm not clear on what the use cases are. When you have a file system, like in the browser, I think the use cases are more important because you can't just make an arbitrary file. And so this is kind of an important way. You need to be able to create a module on the fly. But in Node, you can just write a file to the disk and then import it. So I guess I'd love some more clarity on why, other than just consistency for consistency's sake, why this is really important.
We have several examples in the PR. Are they not telling?
Most of them seem like they could also be done by writing files to the file system.
If you have access to the file system.
Which at the moment everybody does, and we're not yet in a world where that's not the case.
And even some cloud providers don't even allow writes on file system.
Yeah, so in the runtime for GCP, we don't allow writes on the file system in our serverless products.
Like there's no temp directory or permissions to write anywhere, you're saying?
Temp directory is a different thing, but like you can't change or reliably change the file system when it's running. And I know now, for example, actually completely locks down the file system after the build. Salah has their hand up, and then Jan is actually here with me in the room, wants to talk after that.
Yeah, so I missed last meeting, so I'm not sure if we're very close to removing the flag or actually decided to remove it. In case we didn't, it's actually helpful to see the uses that people will come up with for a feature like this. So as long as it's flagged, it's good to actually try and see if it's going to be abused. In terms of interoperability, if you're going to write a module that utilizes data URLs in some way for the browsers, it helps to have the same functionality without needing to circle around inconsistency introduced on a platform basis, because that will force you to avoid static specifiers, which would actually probably result in an overhead that you don't want to introduce for just a case where you have a small difference between how you have like a virtual module and how Node forces you to write that on disk.
Jan had something to add.
Yeah, my thing was basically the same thing that Miles said earlier. Like just yesterday, I talked with somebody who is doing instrumentation for Node, who has to generate content on the fly for security instrumentation purposes, and they just cannot write on disk because they cannot depend on the fact that they can have a reliable disk write at startup in all the environments where people use them.
It's even a temp directory.
Even a temp directory, because, like, for example, I know at Groupon, the temp directory in some environments was set incorrectly, so attempts to write would actually fail because the temp environment variable was not set, or /temp was not mounted the way that you would expect it to be mounted. Like, having an actual 100% way of writing a file to the disk and then reading it is not something you can guarantee across all environments if you don't control them.
And I guess I like so the cloud platform environment makes sense, but like Groupon is like a website and a backend and stuff, so like they can configure themselves however they want.
But if you are that third-party security provider that has a user like Groupon, where
got it.
Back then it was misconfigured, Groupon will complain to them, with Groupon being a placeholder for a company.
Okay, so would it be even if all of these use cases could be done with the file system, the argument here is there needs to be a way to do it without a file system.
Yeah. And that is like just being on par with what you can do on CommonJS, because in CommonJS you don't need to write the file system for these use cases, and it would be a regression if ESM would require you to do it.
Jeffrey is up next.
Yeah, I was also just going to say, like, the word security stuck in my head, because I was thinking, like, if this is if the code you want to run is sensitive in some way, like it has a connection string or credentials in it or something like that, you also might want to avoid writing such code to the file system, because what if the process crashes and then this like temp file that's not supposed to be permanent is there sitting on the file system for other processes to read? If it's never leaves memory, then you are protected against that risk.
I think we should avoid security discussion, at least on this, because it's a very hard topic with Spectre for these.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and in that case, you could make a module that's a function, and you could inject your credentials into the function. Like there's no need to inline the like secret information into source code, because JavaScript has functions. So I'm a little confused about that one as well.
So
actually, can I get a quick clarification, Miles? Sorry,
Yeah.
from Jan. You said in CommonJS you don't need to write to the file system. Why is that? Require it only takes a file path. You can't like require a string like of code.
It is because because the require system is wide open to all kinds of hijinks. You can just randomly create an in-memory module and link it into the module graph as you want. There's no boundaries to what you can hack into it. So you can just generate a module from string because nobody stops you from doing it.
Sure, but then you don't have to have the source code. Then you're not evaling source code, and the contents of the source code aren't the key, like the specifier for your module. So that, like, I don't know if those are the same either. Like if we were just talking about a way to inject a runtime like module namespace object under a specifier, I think that's a different legitimate thing. But like,
Yeah, can we literally monkey patch the require loader and intercept loads and return module objects you just created on the fly?
Okay,
Like,
fair.
and that is what instrumentation providers are doing today.
And is there any plan on adding data URIs to require, or no?
I don't think so. Like require doesn't need it because require has the monkey patching capabilities
Right.
already.
Also, require is file path based. File paths and URIs are not compatible syntax wise. So we probably can never get required to have absolute URLs in it, except for we might be able to patch in like what we do with the file system, where we check if it's an instance of a URL, but that's all I can imagine.
I mean, if it starts with data : it's not a file path, right?
No, it could be on Windows.
Oh, okay.
So kind of taking a step back for a second, it seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong, we have an upstream PR. We do not have upstream objections. Does anyone in the group right now explicitly object to this landing?
It sounds like at least we should keep it behind a flag for now, even if we unflag other parts of the implementation. There are people with concerns.
For what it's worth, I'm content to ship it behind the experimental modules flag and then consider in the future if we want to unflag the whole implementation, but leave certain parts of it behind their own flags. As long as that's an option in general terms, then I don't think it would be, I think it would be a waste of effort to put an additional like data URI flag in now, for example.
Okay, that sounds
Does that
fine.
make sense?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. But if that's not an option later, then I think it'd be nicer, just like we did with the node style exports and resolution or whatever, to have like a data URI flag. But that's like extra work. It'd be nice not to have to deal with right now.
So I will just say, like, I don't think that we need the flag. Independent of that, though, adding the flag is not an exorbitant amount of effort, Jordan. Like, there's a whole system within Node Core to handle the flags, and I personally think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is much weirder to not have the flag right now and then introduce the flag later to individuals.
Okay.
So my preference would be, if you think there is any world where we would ever add the flag in the future, I prefer that we start there and then remove it. Although I do, even more than that, prefer that we just don't have the flag and we support this feature.
Yeah, I mean, it's more that as a non-collaborator and member of the modules group, I have no ability to actually stop it from landing. And sure, I can object and we can try and proceed on good faith, but that also seems silly when like I'm just really I want more time to think about it before data URIs land in the unflagged implementation. But like, so if you think that it would be better to start with a flag now than to ever add it later, then maybe we should start with a flag now. But like, you know, but I would also be content with a kind of good faith thing of like, if we decide we don't want it to go in the final implementation, then we can remove it or leave it behind another flag or something. But I haven't really considered the weirdness aspect of people who are already using the experimental flag and trying to switch to the unflagged version.
Yeah, to me then perhaps it makes sense to just not put it behind a flag and be open to discussing removing it later. Although, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss as to like what the best thing to do is, but it's maybe not the best use of our time here.
Okay. Yeah, in other words, I just want to say like I'm not fully in favor of having it be part of the final implementation yet, but I also do not want to obstruct landing that PR at the moment, if that makes sense.
I mean, maybe what we could do then as a course of action is land it, and then Jordan, do you want to immediately then open a PR for a revert to discuss why it should maybe be removed? Or is that too much noise, do you think?
How about maybe in a week or two after I've thought about it, if I've convinced myself more that it shouldn't be there, I can open up that PR, and then if not, we can just leave it. Does that sound fine?
That sounds fine. Just keep in mind that like the revert will need the same consensus upstream.
Of course, and it's harder to land. I get all that.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Are people happy with that as a solution?
Seems fine.
Okay, cool. So I think we can go ahead and land that as it is today. And then if there are issues in the future, we will come back and look at a revert. Okay, I don't see any notes in the doc. Could someone help with that?
They are beneath where we normally take them.
Sorry,
Oh,
I didn't
there
know
are-
the standard spot to put it.
Oh, no, no worries. I will
Happy to.
copy paste it down for future. We usually keep it under the agenda items just to make it easy to find, but
Okay, cool.
as long as they're there, that's all that matters.
I'll
Yes.
start taking notes now. I don't think I'm the lead on stuff.
Then the next thing we had on the agenda was 359, which I'm noticing is closed. Jan, do we need to discuss this still? Validate export keys and values?
I think we landed Guy's pull request to implement validations for exports. So I think we can remove it from the agenda.
Okay, great. It's closed now, so it wouldn't be picked up. I think it just was closed after. Yeah, it was closed yesterday, so it was
Yeah, I was thinking
closed
so.
after
Yeah,
the
that's
agenda
good.
was made. Okay, does anyone else have anything to add about this one? We move on to the next item.
I'm happy to discuss anything about it if anyone wants to discuss it. Also happy to move on. Yeah, whatever's good.
Yeah, let's move on, and then if anyone wants to talk about it offline, ping Guy or Jan or
Can
the
we
dead
swap the order of the next two?
Sure. So next one is package exports, number 341. Jan, Guy, Brad, do one of you want to lead the discussion?
Let me actually find it. Yeah, I can give. I think in the time since the last meeting, one of the big things is that we made a lot of progress actually implementing exports. It is behind an additional flag that is enabled automatically if you are using the export modules flag. There is a project board in the Node Foundation for the progress. And I also tried to label things that are related to package exports so that they're easier to find. In terms of progress, we now have generally a working implementation that supports most of the things. The only actual big outstanding items are the .main discussion and the internal remappings or imports part, which are what I would consider the two pieces that I would want to have consensus on at least before we could unflag exports, which also means that it is realistically possible to unflag exports before we get to the October timeline for ES modules. So we could actually do what Jordan at some point suggested, that we could unflag exports earlier.
Anyone have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd be very excited to have exports land in CJS as soon as possible. There's tons of use cases for it.
Now, I guess a question would be, if we remove the flag, would the feature still remain experimental for a little while, or would it be immediately stabilized?
Do you mean the modules flag?
It would remain behind the modules flag?
So
Wait,
yeah, sorry, I was just trying to clarify if you mean removing the modules flag would unflag exports, or if you were referring directly to the exports flag.
Oh, so to be more clear, if we're saying that exports is behind a flag, it's separate from modules, that we could unflag and land exports before we've unflagged modules, would it can be considered stable or experimental? Because this is something for us to consider with ESM as well. And I've talked to a couple members of the TSC, and there's some prior art here. We can remove the flag before LTS for ESM. without actually moving ESM itself to stable. It could still remain experimental. Prior art in this includes worker threads, it includes HTTP2, and we could even stabilize it in a Semver minor in LTS. The reason why this ends up happening, and historically has happened with like HTTP2, for example, was that even though it's been behind a flag, it has not had tons and tons of usage. So we very well may find edge cases or things that are problematic that may require the equivalent of a Semver major change that we may be required to land well in LTS. So keeping the API in the experimental status by like kind of how we manage Semver would allow us to make those changes without them being Semver major. Jordan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between functionality that only affects the people using it, like core modules, and ESM, which will affect the entire graph. I don't think it makes any. I think if we're unflagging it, it's stable. Like even if we want to consider it experimental, like that's when everyone's going to start using it. And so I think that the bar isn't really for me, is it stable? It's the bar is, can people use it without explicitly opting into it? And if they can, then I think that it needs to be stable enough that we're willing to risk no further changes being possible.
Salah's got their hand up, and then Jan wants to add something afterwards.
I guess the clarification about exports being ready for CJS, are we saying that even if ESM is flagged, we'll be able to just use a flag to get exports working with CJS? And then are we actually saying that we're going to remove the flag and then it can be used with CJS without ESM flag being like a variable at all?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Jan?
The thing that I wanted to say is the reason why I'm leaning towards saying that after unflagging, exports should be experimental is because exports is an ecosystem change. And if Node is the only runtime, only consumer of package.json metadata that has implemented export support, it feels like jumping the gun to say it's stable because we might get very important implementer feedback from bundlers, for example, which might change some elements of the API. I agree with Jordan that once it's out there and people start publishing packages using it, we have to be very, very careful about those changes. But at the same time, as long as there are still implementations outstanding from the ecosystem, I think it will be, honestly speaking, somewhat experimental.
One thing to add also, Jordan, we can still have the experimental warning in the console when you use the feature. That is what HTTP2 did. Right now you have like FS promises, for example, is still experimental. It's not behind a flag, but there is a very, very clear warning when people use it. I personally am uncomfortable with calling these things stable before they've really had usage. And especially with the way that our LTS works, it would be a real shame to lock in an incompatible version of a new ecosystem feature for 3 years. If the changes are minor from an inconvenience perspective, but major from a semantic versioning perspective.
So to be clear, what I was talking about was unflagging ESM. I think that I don't actually care if we unflag exports for CJS and then mark it as experimental, because what I want us to be eyes wide open about is that once it is unflagged, no matter whether we aspirationally mark it as experimental or not, we may find ourselves unable to suffer the breakage, to endure the breakage of making many kinds of changes. So I'm fine with calling it experimental, but we should all kind of have an understanding amongst ourselves that we're risking it being stable as is based on usage. As far as experimentation with bundlers and stuff, I mean, we either have the expertise or the direct connections to get those changes tested out. I can implement support for exports in Resolve in like less than a day, and like I'm sure Webpack will add it, and ESLint plugin import, I can add it in there as well. Like there's tons of ways to do that. And you know, probably sometime this week I can actually add a rule to ESLint plugin import, like an option for it anyway. So there's like lots of ways we can get the ecosystem prepared for the unflagging, as long as we're kind of saying that pending feedback from those kinds of tools, we're gonna unflag it in CJS soon. I see no reason why those tools, some of which I maintain, wouldn't be willing to adopt it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm fine if we call it experimental. We just need to accept that it probably is stable, you know, or is frozen because of usage.
Well, and that's exactly what we're committing to, in my personal opinion, by removing the flag. I think by keeping the experimental status and continuing to give a warning, what we do is we afford ourselves the flexibility if we need to. Because even something just like changing an error, like not the text, but like the way that we just realize that, hey, these errors are inconsistent, that would be sem ver major if we remove the flag. And like that's the kind of thing that like, we should have the flexibility to change, because I would be very surprised if there aren't little edge cases like that we find once there's more usage.
So the other thing I wanted to point out with warnings is that with all the other things you mentioned, you're using them, and so you get a warning about using them. And yeah, eventually your downstream consumers maybe get the warnings too. But in the case of exports, you're not using it, so you might never see the warning until your consumers install your package. So I'm not sure if that's completely inactionable, basically. So I'm not sure if issuing a warning is even particularly useful, unless we like got npm published to do it or something, you know.
Well, I mean, there's the warning when you run the code. So if you have tests, if you have anything that's running anything and you're writing code in ESM, you're going to see the warning run ESM.
But doesn't exports only kick in when you're exporting from or importing from without, like from outside the package, or requiring from outside it?
We can if you're using Node and we have like the loader that goes and looks at the package JSON, we could look to see if there's a package exports field in the package JSON of the module and warn you're using package exports.
Yeah. Also, just
okay.
On that, on the isn't like your unit test, that is for me one of the minor issues that I forgot to mention for like blocking unflagging. I think it's not okay that you can't unit test exports in the package itself. So I think it's something that we need to fix, that you would see that warning because you would actually use exports in your unit tests. Because otherwise you're never actually testing your public interface.
That's a really good separate point. Like the package maintenance group has talked a lot about how there simply is no ergonomic way to test your package as published, like to test the npm pack output, or to like, you know, things like that. Even almost nobody runs tests against their build output. I've done it in a few packages and it's a huge pain in the ass. So like, it's useful to think about, I think, how people will test this. And it's a really good point. We can just issue the warning if like your own package boundary is using exports, right? Like even if you're not actually utilizing the exports. So that's a great point. That can work. As far as testing it, like I don't know how we would do that unless we solve that other package maintenance problem of like, how do you test your package as published?
Guy is actually working on that with, I think, someone from Puzzle maybe. The current proposal is to basically say, if you use the specifier tilde, it refers to the current package. Tilde slash.
Oh, and that would go through exports?
Yeah, and tilde slash would go through exports as well. So you would have a way to require yourself or import yourself the way that somebody from the outside would, which makes unit testing a lot more sane for packages.
Well, the one that gets kind of interesting there that I'm thinking about is like, with the way that require works right now, like if you're in the test directory, sometimes you would do like require .. to require in the root of your module to like get what you would get from the main. But like in theory, should you only then be able to get the things that are in the exports if you're requiring yourself?
Yeah.
And like what the DX there seems a little inconsistent.
Yeah, so tilde would need to be the default UX for the testing.
Well, I mean, and I think one thing that becomes kind of neat there too is like, if you have the tilde inside of the module as like its self-referential thing, people could just have that all throughout the module to reference themselves. And like that could, Oh, I would love that instead of having to do like dot dot slash dot dot slash
Yeah.
changes all the time. You could name an export and then refer to it with tilde.
Yeah, and even with the imports thing that Guy is currently working on, you can even have internal aliases. So, for example, not tilde slash something, but tilde and then anything but slash could be defined in imports as an alias inside of this package. So, for example, if you have your data directory somewhere and you want to get to it from the source, you could do tilde data slash. And then
Is there?
you
Is
get import what's
yeah? Does tilde slash inside of require currently refer to the home directory though?
No.
No. Okay.
People think it does, and then their stuff doesn't work, and then they stop doing that pattern. So actually, tilde is one of the more common choices for a Babel or Webpack or similar alias to requiring from yourself or importing from yourself. I think that's also an amazing feature. I'd love to see that land in CGS quickly. Go ahead, Bradley.
It's also an invalid package registry name. So
Right.
Even third-party package registries don't allow that, to my knowledge.
Well, and I also wanted to point out that if we specify that the semantics of tilde is that it goes through exports, then I would write all of my unit tests for my external files with tilde, importing from tilde, and all of my unit tests for my internal files using the dot dots. And then I've also clearly made, differentiated my tests of the external interface from my tests of the internals. That actually sounds really cool. Another thing though that we might want to consider, if the files property is in fact package.json and you use tilde and that file is not in the list, maybe we could also make that fail, because one of the reason the files property is dangerous and terrible, and like even though NPM recommends it, people cause bugs all the time with it, is because they forget to add things into their whitelist or their include list, and like being able to write tests that will fail on yourself when you forgot to add something to the files list all of a sudden makes it a potentially safe alternative. So that would also be a powerful thing.
Random advertisement, there's a package called installed-package on NPM that I've wrote that actually solves this by installing into a temp directory if you're on CI, which actually catches the file stuff. Anyhow, different topic. Getting sidetracked.
So kind of stepping back for a second, action items here and making sure we're on the same page. It seems like people are okay with exports having the flag removed while maintaining an experimental status in core separate from the ES modules flag. Does anyone object to that? Great, so we can move forward with that. We keep it with the experimental flag. We could separately dig into what we want to do for ESM itself, although I do think a similar approach would be good, but that's a different agenda topic. It seems like we identified a new feature that we'd want to explore, which is tilde. Is there anyone who wants to maybe take on either putting together a proposal or a pull request for that?
Miles, I think that's basically just almost the same thing as the names proposal that's already on phase 3. It's just swapping out the package name for a tilde.
Let me just grab that really quickly. So this would be...
And that was Guy.
And it's worth noting that using the tilde is actually addresses one of the concerns with the names proposal, which is that it's already valid to have the current package name as a folder in Node modules. So that's actually a really, I'd like to see that change.
Okay, so I guess maybe a better way of putting it, would we want to replace the status from seeking consensus to, implementation? Okay, I'm hearing no objections, so we can update that and then maybe update it from saying name to tilde. And then I'm not hearing anyone right now volunteer to help with the implementation on that, but we can, someone volunteer, we'll figure that out. Cool. Did we miss anything within that discussion? No. So Darcy just posted a link to number 306, which is Guy's issue about it. I'm going to go ahead and throw the modules agenda label on that, and we can revisit this in 2 weeks. That way, if nothing's moved, we can figure out how to keep it going. Darcy, thanks for dropping that link. Okay, so next and last on the agenda, we have loader hooks, which is issue number 351. Brad, Guy, Jan, one of you want to take lead on this?
I can. I won't be able to help for notes as much though.
Okay.
So we have a lot of comments both in GitHub and on the design document itself. Not too much has changed since last meeting on this, but we have started adding success criteria through examples for API designs, and it looks like we need to sync up about changing the hooks in general in a variety of ways. There have been a lot of suggestions in different directions from those comments. It seems like there's a general feeling that we should split up the hooks somewhat. So there's a few ideas on what the actual divide should be, but it seems at least there is a fairly consistent overall feeling that having resolve return a location and having a separate fetch hook that can convert a location into a module record or a resource for a module record is an approach that is being talked about. So we probably want to figure out how we want to split that and start moving on it. There are still some questions about how loaders should define their format. Currently, the design document has a MIME as what it's using to determine format. Our current loaders are using a string enum, and there's some contention on both ends on which should be used. I think that is something that we're probably going to have to just agree upon here and reach consensus on. We only have 10 people here, so we might not be able to. But we should at least talk about it again. And so that's probably what we should open up with talking about. So, Guy, you've got probably strong opinions. I've got strong opinions, so I think you and me are the main talking people for this one. I can let you talk first, I guess, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know the thread on the loader discussion looks quite heated, but actually I think we have a lot of agreement on things. I actually don't think there is that much contention here. I think the biggest thing I just wanted from a usability point of view for this composition models was separating the hooks, and I'm really happy to see that we can look at those designs. For the MIME stuff, basically it's just usability concerns, but it feels like it is superficial stuff at some level. I am a little bit concerned that, for example, we don't have a well-defined MIME type for what a node built-in would be, or what a node file would be. So we sort of have to come up with something for these cases that may seem somewhat contrived. Gus, you say we do have a .node MIME type?
We have application/node, but that's only for CJS. So we tried to apply for one under the standards track for the C++ modules. That got rejected because under standards track, a file needs to have a well-defined content format, and our C++ modules do not. So they vary per architecture, and very per OS. So we can try to register something under the different trees that are not under standards track, such as the vendor track. And we can probably go through as long as we agree upon what we want to call those. So, yeah. But we haven't tried to get a non-standards track MIME for C++ add-ons, no.
But I'm completely happy to go with mimes, and yeah, I don't see a problem with moving forward with that. Yeah.
Okay. So we can move on to another issue. So one of our design examples that we're kind of struggling with on reaching a decent experience doing is the ability to have composed instrumentation of built-ins, basically. So I've added an example, and this may not cover what people are trying to do, so it would be good just to get confirmation that this doesn't have any edge cases missing. But basically, the contrived example is adding 2 instrumentations to FS read file sync, and those are going to be one, adding a console.time and .timeEnd around invocation of it, and the other adding an invocation count logged whenever read file sync is called. If you have 2 loaders doing this, it's actually fairly hard to build right now. It's hard to build in pretty much everything I've seen so far. And so we really do need some more design work on this one. There are some ideas thrown around. A guy showed me an interesting idea of using import meta to kind of pre-inject other module namespaces so that they can be used without a bunch of redirection or source code rewriting. I think we just kind of, this is one of the harder solves. Another built-in success example we have is basically the null loader, which is basically just a loader that prevents loading something. And the example you need to prove on that one is preventing loading FS. HTTPS is another one. You can imagine how that works. Synthetic module loader. Synthetic modules are going to be modules created from stuff in memory. A transpiler loader. A transpiler loader is different from a synthetic module loader. The success criteria here actually includes the ability to have a custom format sent through the loader pipeline. So, yep. For that one, we're just saying that you have to implement regular expression modules because there's already a regular expression parser in JavaScript. So that's easy enough. Yep. Are there specific use cases that we need to add for the success criteria that people are wanting to see? Or specific things they need shown that the implementation can do? So some of the talks have been about concerns of either isolation or head of line blocking, where one loader can essentially block all loading from occurring anywhere. We don't have those in our success examples. They're in the constraints above, and I feel that's okay. I think it is much harder to design a proof of isolation than it is to work towards it, at least in my experience. Similarly, for a proof of not causing performance problems.
So we've got Jeffrey, then I'm going to add something, and then Alex is up. And if someone else could help with the notes, please, that would be appreciated.
Hey, I was just gonna ask a question, Brad. I am just glancing at that loader design doc again now for the first time since you initially posted it, and I see the examples you added at the end, and that's great. Thank you. I was just gonna ask, like, if man, maybe it's a little too early for this, but whenever you're ready, I'd love to see like the whole picture of an example. Like, I don't know where this code would go, like this class that's here in the document. Like, where would I save such code, and how would I like tell Node to load it as a loader, for example, for my app? Like, if we could have maybe a repo with examples or something, I don't know, just to kind of show like the full picture of how to create a loader and how to use a loader. I would find that helpful.
So, I don't think we're changing how loaders are actually injected into the runtime versus the current experimental modules. I haven't heard
So in
any-
other words, like a -- loader flag.
Yes, there are other things that people have talked about. I have talked about adding them to package.json. Some talk about adding them to policy files and stuff, so you aren't modifying the command line. Has been discussed, but I haven't really followed through with that because the command line works at least while we're implementing it on the first pass. So
I think we should consider trying to find some way to make these loadable that doesn't involve a command line flag, because I think that's going to be difficult for some people.
can you clarify what the difficulty is?
I'm just thinking of like npm start scripts, running things through other environments, like running things in via Docker, like being able to send an app to someone else and they know what to do. I mean, yeah, they could be part of like an npm start command or something like that, but I'm just thinking of other ways to start apps, like running through the command jest, running through the command meteor. Like, you know, you don't always run a Node app starting with the word node on it. So all these other ways would need to be able to like pass through these arguments and stuff. So
Sure. Up next was Alex, I believe.
I think Miles was
Oh.
after me.
Yeah, so I just, as a heads up, I just wanted to say I edited the original post in the loader hooks issue and just added a link to the design doc to make it easy to find. I have not had a chance to extensively review it yet, so I won't dig in too much on these, but just in case they're not included, like some examples that I think would be really good. I know that both Tink and Yarn for plug and play have expressed interest in loader hooks that allow them to instrument a fest, but it sounded like, Brad, that was one you already have. Is that accurate?
Yes, but that would not help them with ESM itself. So they're using the fact that Node's CommonJS implementation doesn't have a robust file system call. And so they're monkey patching internals that we don't guarantee will continue working. We don't have any example of providing functionality that would allow them a supported path in the future in this.
So that's one that I would love to see. Like, obviously they have their solution to this space right now, but kind of if we went back to first principles, and Darcy says maybe synthetic loaders could help with that. But I would love to see at the very least one of them aligned explicitly kind of solving that problem space, whatever the solution is. The other one, and you can tell me if you have something there, is the APM case where you need to intercept loading of built-ins and maybe change the built-ins themselves, or alternatively, like something that allows like programmatic instrumentation. It sounds like the timer one that you were working on is aligned with that, but I just wanted to make sure that the APM case is explicitly aligned with one of the examples we have.
Yes, the nested composition of built-ins is around having multiple APMs.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Alex, on to you.
Hi. First on Jeffrey's point. So with the -- loader syntax or way of using loaders. I think we can look to the way loaders are currently utilized with CJS. Besides using -- require at the command line and in other tools that pass that along to Node, the current way things are done is the only other way that you can do a require inside of your script. However, due to the various security reasons, we don't want to offer that particular power for ESM loaders. So it's but with the -- loader flag, it's pretty much the same. So we can look to that for usability, I guess. And then another thing I wanted to ask is kind of present a possible use case that I think is currently outside of the current idea for loaders. So they currently can only return content. And so there's no dynamic instantiation of modules. And one current use case in CJS is using V8 code cache to instantiate modules faster from pre-compiled bytecode. The only way I can think of doing this with the proposed loader system is by offering a new type that Node can interpret that somehow pairs source code and bytecode together, and then can dynamically instantiate a module from that. But I figured I'd put it forward.
Do you think that should be success criteria or a desired feature?
I guess I see it as separate from loader hooks because I think it can only be implemented at the what Node can instantiate level. So it would have to be a new type that Node can handle. Okay. But it's good to keep in mind, I guess.
Just a quick time check. We've got all of 2 minutes left. We've got Salah and Guy who still have stuff to add. Alex, are you good for right now?
Yep, just wanted to put those forward.
Awesome, thank you. So Salah and Guy, Salah first.
Yeah, I just wanted to recap on splitting resolve, just making it 2 separate operations. I've been thinking of that, and I believe locating and resolution could be scoped to package scope or some abstraction of scopes, but location could be mapping per a realm or per context, a particular scope to a particular location. I have more details on those thoughts, but I just wanted to get some quick insights, what everybody thinks.
Is it something that we could kick to the issue tracker just because we only have 1 minute left in time?
We can do it offline. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Guy, we have 1 minute left.
No, it's just really interesting points to hear with the caching stuff. It would be interesting to understand what models or proposals might be able to capture that. I mean, there's no reason not to push the net out as far as we can in the design phase here. So now's the time to think of these things. And similarly with the FS injection stuff, one of the things is it's a little bit like doing keyhole surgery in this loader model because the load is running on a separate realm or a separate context. So we're dealing with the fact that the only way that you can run code to instrument FS is providing source that's going to execute against FS. So when you want multiple things to run code that's going to instrument, it's almost just like, yeah, loading a polyfill.js or something and injecting into the environment that you know is going to be running against the core FS and setting it up as you want it to be set up. But yeah, that it's covered. But yeah, the model is we just need to keep the use cases in mind, I think, as we go.
Okay, cool. We're over time, so I'm going to go ahead and close this meeting. Thank you all for watching, tuning in, and those on the call for making your time available. Gonna stop the stream now. Thank you.